if we still have time. Okay, that's why I'm planning to plan this session. So first, rough agenda so that you know how we are going, right? So I'll start with data center evolution, right? Why cloud computing came into picture, why we needed that, right? It's not just a buzzword, but there was a real need to it, right? So we'll go through that. Then we'll talk about what cloud computing is and their benefits, right? And finally, we'll move to AWS, why AWS, and we'll talk about some of the AWS core services. Finally, I'll definitely cover the certification aspect, which I understand is many of you are interested in. So this is the agenda I'm looking at. So if you have questions to any of these related topics, right? So please wait till then. Like if you have questions on certification, please wait till I reach the certification time. Otherwise, any other questions, right? Please feel free to put it on the chat window, and I'll try to answer it as we go along. Okay. Also, do let me know if I'm going too fast or if I'm not very audible. Okay. Okay. So let's get going. So in general, like any data center, right? So by data center, I mean like it could be a data center which is a big enterprise wants to have all their compute resources in, right? So there's some of the things that they would look for, or it could be a common data center where multiple people are using, right? So what there is a high availability, which means as minimal downtime as possible, the servers and the resources being available as much as possible. Okay. And the second thing is, say for high availability, what you could do is like could have too many servers there and have lot of redundancy. But what would that result in is you will end up having lower utilizations. You'll have too much of redundancy. So for efficient data center, right, you'll also need to utilize it better, right? Not just having too many servers, but you want to utilize them as much as possible, maybe more than 70 or say 80% like that. And the third thing is uh, anytime you want more, right? So suppose you got a new project or some sudden launch is happening, so you don't want to wait long to get the servers up and running. You want to scale them as the demand comes in. And next aspect is a disaster recovery, right? So that's inevitable. Like how much ever we plan, the best of applications, you can't completely avoid disaster kind of a scenario. So the fourth aspect is like how do you prepare for that? How do you while you cannot avoid a disaster, right? But how do you minimize that impact? How do you still ensure high availability even in times of disaster? Okay. And other aspect is a self-service, right? So instead of every time like going through a lengthy process to request your resources, like if there was a place where you could go and say, okay, I want this CPU, this memory, or this storage, and just get it like on the fly. And so that's the best mode to have, right? And with self-service, and we also need to cater to multi-tenant, right? So if you want to have better utilization, right, so you need to accommodate multiple tenants or multiple users together. And with multi-tenancy also comes in the security consideration, that how do I isolate resource of one person from another, or one company from another, one customer to another. So these are the key concepts, right? Any data center would look to address, right? So if these all are covered, like I'll have a really good data center. So it all I'm not sure how many of you worked on mainframes, but so these are the early kind of servers that were widely used, right? And some of the features they had was like they had the CPU, memory, storage, everything built into it. Okay. And they had redundancy built in inside, which means like suppose a particular storage goes down, right? Part of it is already replicated into another storage, and it was that's a redundant system, right? But it had its downsides, right? It was they were very costly, and the specialized skills were required to operate them, right? And if you want to upgrade or make some changes, right, it was not very easy. So soon the world started moving on from mainframes, right? So then we had these standalone servers, and this form of server typically is called a blade server, right? It's like a thin and wide kind of a server. So these are the blade servers that typically used in the data centers, right? So and they offered more flexibility than mainframe, and they were accessible over your internet or over your company internet. But they didn't have the internal redundancy that mainframes had, and since the storage also built into it, right? So if a server fails, that was a single point of failure. And also, on an average, right, industry average, their utilizations were very low, 5 to 15%, like, which were very low. So to address this, like, the next evolution came in terms of centralized storage. You had these standalone servers, and then you also have this NAS and SAN kind of storage, right? So centralized storage where your you have this redundancy through the storage. So if one server goes down, right, so storage is in another SAN or NAS kind of a central storage. So you had that redundancy built into it, and so it resulted in better storage utilization, and the storage could be accessed over network. But this is one more system into the overall piece, right? So which means right now you had only servers and network, but now you had a set of new storage devices coming into it. So that added to the overhead. Now, so to address all of this, right? So slowly, the virtualization came into picture, right? In short, what virtualization does is it will make one machine look like multiple machines, which means you could have one server like this, but you could install multiple operating systems on it, right? So which we call as words or guest operating systems. So what this enabled is each of these virtualized machines, right? So you have one server. Suppose you have 10 virtual machines on top of it. Each virtual machine operated as if it owned the entire hardware underneath it. So that kind of abstraction was provided to them. And this resulted in earlier, if there was only one workload running on a server, right? If you put 10 virtual machines, you could typically run like 10 different workloads on it or even more, which greatly increased the utilization. If they were 5 to 10, 15% earlier, right? So this resulted in moving it upwards of 50s, and also it helped in moving things around quickly, right? So for these virtual machines, you can take a snapshot or a image of this virtual machine and move it anywhere. Like, for example, if the server goes down, right? If you have that image as backup, you can quickly take that image, put it on another server, and bring up your entire application very quickly, right? So talking about the words, right? So typically, like, you have server, and each of these words they're called virtual machines, so they're called instances, and sometimes or guest operating systems. So different terms, but typically what's happening here is you had one physical hardware, but you have multiple guests running on top of it, each having their own operating system. Need not be same as the underlying operating system. One could be Windows, one could be Linux, so there could be multiple operating systems on top of it, and each of them hosting multiple applications within them. So, and if you go one step deeper into that, right? So the physical server is the one that is down here, and then on top of it, so for all this virtualization to work, right? So there is a layer called hypervisor. Typically, we have operating system, right? So instead of that, these servers will have a layer called hypervisor, which does all the magic, right? Making spinning up these virtual machines and providing all the underlying resources to it, ensuring the isolation. So all that magic happens to the hypervisor. So uh, since the hardware, like, if you earlier needed 10 operating systems, right? So now you're able to run on a much lesser number of physical servers, so which reduce the hardware costs, and so multiple workloads, multiple operating system. We just mentioned that, right? And also from if you look at provisioning physical server versus virtual machine, right? So since the hardware is already there and you can quickly take an image and deploy it, right? So it will also result in much faster provisioning of the resources. So if your operating system installation, if you remember, right, you used to take a CD, deploy the operating system there, install all the applications. But with images, right, what you have is everything is prepackaged. You just pull that image, download it, and deploy it. So it's that fast. And the disaster recovery, or DR, also improved because you have this redundancy through images, right? Or you could have uh, still have this state storage concept built into it. And so even though there is a disaster, right, you can quickly bring up your applications which by reducing the downtime greatly, right? And the lower number of hardware or the servers, right, that will also directly reduce your energy or power cost. Right? And also less time to deploy means also increased productivity. So these are the benefits of virtualization. Okay. And in data centers, right, if you look at, like, we talked about the servers, right, blade servers, and they're all typically put in these racks. So the picture you see is a rack inside a data center, and you have number of these servers, right, and within each rack you have the servers, and the data center will have typically hundreds of these racks, right? And uh, usually, if you're looking at, like, one rack having multiple servers, and one data center having multiple racks, and if you look at a typical or a large scale data center, right, it's not just even one building. Like, there could be multiple buildings like this housing a lot, I mean, thousands of these servers, right? Now, virtualization is good. We saw the benefits of that. And probably take one server and manage virtualization on top of it. It's not very difficult. But once the scale increases, right, once you have the scale of these thousands of servers across the data center, across the racks, it's not easy to manage all of them, right? So if you have to log in into each of these servers, bring up the servers up and down, it's going to be a nightmare. So that's where cloud orchestration or infrastructure as a service came into picture. Okay. And what this helped is, like, leveraging the virtualization technologies. So it simplified the deployment and management of these virtual machines, right? So everything through a single console, right? If you want to plan your DR, if you want to take backups, okay, if you want to deploy your application in a high availability mode, creating replicas and all of that, right? And that also with, and these orchestration softwares, right, they also had this SaaS kind of multi-tenancy, okay, and they automatically do your network and storage setup instead of you having to go to each server and do it for you. Okay. And not just deploying it, they had a robust monitoring setup wherein you can see, okay, I have 10 servers deployed, 10 virtual machines deployed, and my each of these servers, my utilization is this much, okay, or like somewhere, like some machine is going down. So that complete visibility is provided at one place, at a centralized place. And on top of all of this, right? So the biggest advantage they provided was pay for what you use, right? Basically, if you buy your own hardware, like, you'll have to pay upfront, and whether you use or not, you're consuming that, right? But with cloud orchestration softwares, like, and with this in self-service mode, you just pay for what you use. So to formally define this, right? So we can define cloud computing as uh, on-demand delivery of IT services via the internet with pay-as-you-go model. Okay, so this is how we uh, defined it. It's like, I mean, when you say IT services, right? It could be your compute power, it could be storage, database, anything you want, right? So it and it's, if you want to compare it, like, how you turn on a switch in your house, right? Once you turn on a switch in your house, the power company send you electricity, right? And how much ever you consume, you bill for that at the end of the month. So very similar to that. So cloud computing is like a similar way, delivering of IT resources uh, over the internet and in the pay-as-you-go pricing model. So to put that into perspective, so let's take this analogy, right? Uh, you have a house, okay? You have certain appliances inside your house. You have your fridge, you have your uh, fans, lights, everything, right? So you need power for that, right? So you could do two things. One, you could buy a generator, okay, and with whatever capacity that is required to run your fridge and fans and lights, okay. And on the other hand, you could subscribe to a power company, like, for example, in Telangana, Hyderabad, we have TS, SPDCL, and things like that, the discoms, right? So to correlate, right? So diesel generator, like, both of them provide you electricity, but with the generator, right? So what you also end up doing is, while you upfront pay for this generator, you are also have to take care of its maintenance, right? Uh, Fill the diesel required for that, do a periodic maintenance for that. Okay, so all these things you have to take care of it. Whereas for if you're doing it from an electricity company, okay, all you bother is, look, you get a connection, you use it, right? You don't bother about if a transformer flipped or some power cable, something happened, right? It's the power company's responsibility. They come and fix it. They do everything. You're not bothered about it. Okay. So, and secondly, now, so you bought a diesel generator of a certain capacity. Your fridge and lights and fans are working fine. But now summer came and you purchased an AC, but your generator capacity is only limited, right? So what do we do? You cannot it cannot separate your AC. You'll either have to get one more generator or sell this and buy a bigger generator and things like that. So basically, if you want to scale up, right, so it's not easy. So but in case of regular from the power company, you don't tell them, okay, I'm buying an AC, I want more electricity. You just get your AC, fix it and use it, right? So is that kind of on demand service that you get from electricity company. So just in a similar way, right? So if you compare with your own data center versus a cloud provider, it's the same analogy. So for your own applications, right? So you could buy your servers, okay, upfront, you pay for them, okay, you do the maintenance, your installation, you can do all of that, but your capacity needs increase, right? It's you have to go through the entire cycle again. Whereas on the with cloud computing, so what you do is you just go and say, okay, I want more, and you just consume. End of the day, you get the bill and pay for it, just like your electricity bill. Okay, and that's the energy I want to bring here, right? So it's more about like from upfront payment or the initial capital expense, you're kind of moving to a OPEX or a operating expense model, right? And you consume and pay for only what you use. So at night time, if you're
Brother
turning
Doctor
off,
Sir.
sure. Yeah.
Sorry, please go ahead.
Okay, okay, okay. So then, yeah. So if you're again same analogy, right? If you turn off the lights at the night time, you're not built for that. Similarly, on cloud computing, if you turn off your resources, you're not built for that. So that's a point I'm trying to bring up with this analogy. And also, if you look at the uh, disaster kind of a scenario, right? So I'm not saying I mean, see, generator can go down for a reason, for many reasons, but even we have power cuts. I'm not saying cloud computing it's like 100% everything available. We also have power cuts, but one way to we mitigate that is we go for a three-phase connection instead of one phase, right? Which means like if your one phase goes down, you still have other phase, you get power city. So there could be case where all three phases go down. But so similarly on cloud computing also, while 100% availability is not guaranteed anywhere, but you can architect your application such a way that like you create that redundancy, right? You kind of put distributed applications across and get that high availability. So when we go deeper into the infrastructure, right, I'll talk about a bit more, but keep this analogy in mind all the time, right? So generator versus a power company sending you electricity. That's the difference between owning your own data center versus deploying your resources on cloud. Okay, right. So just summarizing the same things, right? So typically on-prem, right, you have all your servers and everything, and you have your IT team managing all of that, right? Internet, like it's all abstracted, servers, applications, everything are in the cloud. Okay, as a user, you just connect via internet and procure them, right? So what this provides you is increased agility, right? You don't have to wait for something to be set up, right? You just get everything on demand, okay? And scalability also with the scale at which the hyperscale clouds run, right? So it's very hard to exhaust that capacity, so you get nearly unlimited scalability. And with the multiple the redundancy that's already built into these cloud servers, right? So you can improve your reliability also, like the three-phase power supply that I talked about, right? You can deploy applications across, distribute it, and get a better reliability. And it also provides you with lower cost because just by sheer economies of cloud, right? You buy something in bulk, it automatically reduces your cost. On top of it, you go with the pay-as-you-go model, right? So that also reduces your cost. Okay. So again, so with comparing a data center versus a cloud, right? So you invest upfront on data center, whereas on cloud you pay only for what you consume. And so if you, we all know, like you buy anything in bulk, you get it at a better price, right? So at cloud companies, what they do is like when they purchase servers or hardware, everything when they do at scale, right? Obviously, the cost incurred is lower than what somebody gets directly, right? And that savings are passed on to the customers, and overall you get a reduced cost because of that. Okay, and the next thing is on the capacity, right? So we talked about the generator, right? So you bought an AC, suddenly you need more capacity. It's similarly like you're doing a new product launch, or suddenly like a pandemic came and everybody's working from home, or everybody is doing online education. So a lot of load coming in, right? What do? There's not enough time to buy more servers. So basically, if you're going on on-premise, right? So suddenly if your capacity more, like you won't be able to, if your demand is more, you won't be able to serve them. And similarly, if you are so even if you anticipated, okay, if the pandemic is going to come in and you procure a servers upfront, right? So what happen is you'll have too many servers doing nothing, a lot of idle capacity and resource wastage there. So these are two extremes, right? One is like you don't want to waste too much. On the other hand, you don't want to be in a position where you have too much load coming and you're not able to um, serve them. So what cloud computing provides you is ability to scale on demand, right? So basically, if you look at the blue line, right? So that is your, if you assume that's your uh, uh, traffic that is coming in. Right? So with cloud computing, you can actually have an automated scaling wherein you can have your resources provision to match that, right? So you can see that yellow line going up and down, right, as per your demand. So yeah, that's how you ensure like you have better capacity utilization, but at the same time meeting all your capacity needs. For example, Hotstar, which runs on AWS, right? So I'm not sure about the IPL numbers, but last year in the Indian New Zealand World Cup semifinals, so there was a record for concurrent viewers on the same platform, right? So Hotstar has this record now with 25.3 million. So if they had to plan and do it, I mean, I'm not sure how would they would have worked it out, but with cloud computing, they were able to meet that need. We are and serving 25 million plus concurrent users, right? So right, and other aspect is the speed and agility, right? So usually in any procurement model, right? So procurement, by that I mean like if somebody says like within a company they say like I want few servers, right? They have a process. It's not like anybody can just go and purchase it, right? There'll be a process. So you need a management approval, finance approval. You create a purchase order, then goes to the vendor. Vendor will ship it, deliver it, and it comes here, and then there is an IT team which will deploy it. So there's a whole process that happens when you request a bunch of servers to come uh, into a company, right? And this usually is a week's time. It's not something that will happen overnight, right? But with cloud computing, it's at the click of a button. Any server you want, it's a click of a button. Within minutes, you can provision servers. So that's the speed and agility that cloud computing can provide you, right? And so and next thing I want to talk about is on the excuse me. So right. So what lot of businesses do, right? So any maintenance that you do on data centers is also a cost, right? And so typically, if you want to better utilize your resources, right, you want to put those resources on what matters to your business, right? So for example, if you're a big basket, and during this time also last few months they seen a huge number of like spike in the orders and everything for them, right? And so if they had to focus on okay, how to do my operating system installation, how do I run my database, all of that, right? So that's not their core business. They should their main business is like okay, how do I create more slots to deliver groceries or everything that customers need, right? So how can I improve my supply chain? So those are things that BigBasket would like to focus on rather than doing an operating system patching or deploying scripts and all of that, right? So that's the kind of what I would call is differentiation, right? While in internally we use this term called undifferentiated heavy lifting. What that means is like installation of a server or a operating system or managing that, all of that is it's like anybody can do it, right? It doesn't differentiate your business whether a big basket does it or a Swiggy does it, right? It's same for everybody. So what we are saying is these kind of things offer to somebody like which can be automated, which who can take care of it, so that whatever resources you have, you focus on your business and your customers, right? So that way you focus on what differentiates your business and innovate on that part. And finally, the cloud providers also provide you with the ability to launch globally, right? So we didn't have Uber earlier, but it was in US. But when Uber launched in India, right? So they don't have to think too much about, okay, how do I going to launch in India, right? So what they did was they know that, okay, there is a cloud available in India, and just the way they do deploy in US, right? So they would deploy the same thing in India or Singapore, and they can start deploying their applications, right? So that's all. I mean, you can actually go global in minutes. Okay, so that's about like all the benefits of cloud computing and all the advantages there, right? Now we'll look at some of the cloud providers who are widely used, right? So AWS, Amazon Web Service, Microsoft has Azure platform, Google has GCP, Google Compute Platform, Oracle has Oracle Cloud, IBM also has their own cloud, right? So there are a lot of providers, right? So many of you might have this question, right? Okay, which cloud computing should I opt for, right? Which cloud computing service should I learn? Okay, or which one should I use for at my work or for my own company if I'm planning to start? You may have many of these questions, right? So I won't talk about too much about compute, but just one point I want to make here is all these cloud providers together, right? So they currently are addressing only 3% of the market, right? So the cloud computing market or the infrastructure market, out of the 100%, all the cloud providers together, they're only currently at 3%, which means there is a huge amount of growth for each of these cloud providers. Okay, so I'm not just singling out anyone. So cloud computing as a domain, right? So there's huge potential. So right now we'll move on to AWS. That's primarily because like that's what I know best, and also there's some reasons I'll tell you like why AWS is being a leader here, right? So while we'll focus on AWS in the next few slides. Okay, so this analysis is from Gartner, industry special. I mean, they are well-known analyst in the market, and they every year they do this magic quadrant, right? It's so not just for cloud computing domain, right? So they do it for various industries. So every year they do it, and they plot each of the companies along these two axes, right? One is on the completeness of vision and also the ability to execute it. And for the 10 years in a row, AWS has been the leader. Like, I mean, not just leader, right? You can see the difference compared to other providers. So it's far ahead both in terms of the vision and also ability to execute. Okay, so that's one of the reasons many companies or enterprises are running on AWS cloud. So that started with the experience, right? So if you look at firstly, AWS was the first cloud computing company. So it started way back in 2006. So it's actually 14 years now already, right? So AWS had a head start of at least 6 years compared to all other cloud providers. And based on that experience, right? So actually, AWS CEO says this. So there is no compression algorithm for experience, right? So which means there are certain things, right? So you learn or get to know only when you operate things at a cloud scale, right? and based on that learnings, you improve your service and be better over time. So experience is one of the crucial things, and the global reach of AWS, right? So 1 minute. Yeah, I think I'll cover the global reach later on, but quickly, right? So AWS Cloud is available across 77 availability zones spanning 24 geographic regions, right? 20 geographic regions means different physical locations across the globe, right? The Europe, Asia, Australia. So a lot of this, we'll talk a bit more about that later, but is a wide reach in terms of going global. Okay, so security and compliance is one of the key pillars. So it's called the job zero at AWS, and all the banks or finance institutions, governments, they're all running on AWS, which means they feel the platform is secure enough, right? And there are certifications, third-party audits done to ensure that. And if you look at the innovation or the number of offerings, right? So there are tons of them again. So just the service offering 175 plus offerings plus sub features within that, there's a lot of them. And the capability itself, right? If you look at the storage capacity with the hardware that is available, you could even deploy with 80,000 IOPS for your storage per instance. Okay, so not just that, and this one thing I find unique is price reduction. So periodically, what will happen is with the innovation that is coming in, or the scale at which it operates, right? So what will happen is it will actually reduce the cost to acquire certain products. So, for example, a particular innovation on a processor brings down the cost of the processor, so which results in a cost savings for AWS, and same is then passed on to the customers. So over the years, right, there have been 80 price reductions. Okay, and machine learning. So you've probably been hearing about artificial intelligence, machine learning. So 81% of applications, various ML applications are running on cloud, right? And there's a very thriving ecosystem in terms of partners and ISVs. So marketplace. So all this put together, right? So this is a very vibrant community where you get a lot of support and a community to uh, go together with. Okay, so some of the reasons why many customers are choosing AWS. Okay, now so breadth and depth of services, right? Which means like not just having a number of services, but also having a deep functionality within each of these services. I'm not sure if you're able to read all of them, but so maybe I'll just zoom in on this part, right? So if you look at compute itself, right? Compute means uh, when we talked about virtualization and infrastructure as a service, right? We spoke about virtual machines and all of that, but within that itself, right, there is so many other things that came into picture. There are containers, there is serverless. So this like this, right? So the cloud didn't stop with just compute, right? So it expanded into analytics, into AR, VR, and gaming databases. And so if you look at even there is something related to satellites also. Suppose you want to start your own company doing something with satellite. So there is a service called ground station where you can actually pull data from satellites and do something on top of that. Okay, so that's the depth and breadth of services. Okay, some of the categories just to put it at a high level, right? So compute, storage, uh, analytics, security, developer tools, all the DevOps stuff. Okay, mobile services, IoT, okay, games, all of that. Okay, so next I'll go into uh, bit deeper into specific services, starting with AWS Global Infrastructure. Okay. So what we cover, just to recap, right, what we covered is we started with data center evolution, right? Why there was a need for virtualization, and even the virtualization is there, but you still needed something to orchestrate that virtualization, which resulted in cloud computing or infrastructure as a service, right? And then we talked about AWS and how I mean, what differentiates AWS from the rest of them cloud providers. Okay, now we'll go deeper, a bit more technical, right, into specifics of AWS. So we'll start with AWS Global Infrastructure. Okay, And we quickly covered all this, like, but to recap, so the infrastructure has inbuilt security, they designed for availability and performance, and they run at very large scale. Okay, and they're all flexible as well. So, and all that, like ensuring low cost, which results in low cost for the customers as well. Right. So, so this is the spread across the globe that is there. So, two three concepts I want to cover here. Right. So, firstly, uh, we we talked about data centers, right? So, each data center has uh, hundreds of racks. Within those racks, there are thousands of servers. So that's the scale each data center is. And you put a few of these data centers together. Okay, few data centers together, and that becomes an availability zones. So just remember this terminology, right? So you have data centers, few data centers coming together as an availability zone. Okay, and availability zones are so completely isolated in terms of their power supply, okay, networking and everything. So that, like, even if something happens, right, so they are resilient, like floods or earthquake. So that way they're even there's a grid failure, right? So they kind of isolated that way. So that's an availability zone. And you put these availability zones together. Like, typically there are about two, three availability zones put together, and that becomes a region. Okay, that's a physical geographic region, and there are 24 geographic regions across the globe. Okay, so for example, in India we have region in Mumbai. Okay, and Mumbai region has three availability zones, and these availability zones, they are all like slightly separated physically, but what they have is like a very low latency networking that is there, which means that to ensure high availability, right? Like the three-phase RPCD that I talked about, if you deploy applications across these availability zones, it'll even if one availability zone goes down for any reason, it's very rare incident, but still you'll have that redundancy, right? So like that, if you look at across the globe, there are a bunch of regions in US, and then across the globe you can see. Okay, but I want you to also notice one thing at the bottom, right? There are new regions coming up. Okay, four regions, and there's one coming up in India as well. And I would say, like, it is a great timing that we are having this session today, because just yesterday, so there's a second region in India announced, and that's going to be coming up in Hyderabad. Okay, and so that's a huge investment. Like, you can see the tweet from IT Minister KTR also there. Like, so about 2.7 billion investment is coming to set up this region in Hyderabad. And so it's significant in many ways, because uh, if you go back, right, apart from US, no other country has more than one region. Okay, if you look at Middle East, the entire Middle East has only one region. Okay, and if you look at the entire continent of South America, it has only one region. And so it's only after US, like India is the only country to have second region, which also means that, like, so somebody investing 2 million would have done that calculation, right? So they would have seen the potential of cloud market in India. So which is significant, if the such investment is coming, which also means that there will be a lot of companies, I mean, or there are already many companies of using AWS cloud in various ways, and which also means a lot of opportunities, right? So if companies are adopting cloud and AWS, which also means there will be more jobs, more of that coming. Okay, and one more thing I want to mention is when Mumbai region was launched, right? So it started with two availability zones, whereas in Hyderabad it's straight away starting with three availability zones. So which means you can imagine the kind of scale that is being projected, or the consumption that is being projected to happen within India. Okay, so yeah, so and we'll go a bit deeper into the regions as well now, right? So you just briefly spoke. So you have these multiple data centers combining to form an availability zone, and multiple availability zones combining to form a region, right? So, and they have this underlying redundancy to provide you the high availability, high scalability, and fault tolerance. Okay, so that's a region design here. Okay, so bit more on that, right? So they have a meaningful distance of separation. They're fully isolated, unique power supply to them. Okay, and I mean, hundreds of thousands of servers that are deployed in each of them. Right. And so apart from the regions and availability zones, right? So there are also these edge locations. So edge locations are so on top of these regions and availability zones, right? So this is like you see like 2000 plus points of presence, right? So these are the locations where uh, so the additional hardware is deployed at these locations so that so for example if you want to something to have even more latency, right? So AWS has edge locations across the country in Delhi, Calcutta, Chennai, and multiple places, and Hyderabad also has an edge location already. So what that would help is like so there is some caching or some edge processing that can be done at these locations, which will further reduce the time taken for data to reach the people in those regions, right? So, and there are some of these edge services, right? For example, CloudFront is a content delivery network or a CDN service, so that is available at the edge locations. So Lambda is a serverless functionality that is also available at the edge location. So there are few services there, but as a takeaway, just remember that edge locations from regions, availability zones. So that's one where the actual bulk of the servers are there. But edge locations are closer to the user locations to reduce the latencies and give better performance. So that's what you can remember from edge locations. Okay. And next we'll move to VPC, okay, or virtual private cloud. So this is some so when we talked about cloud computing, right? So it is multi-tenant in a way that multiple customers log into the same cloud, deploy their applications. So it's very important to have isolation, right? So the main building block of this isolation is at the network level. And what happens is when somebody signs up for an account within AWS, first thing they would do is to deploy their own virtual private cloud, which means that is your own network where nobody else can come into it, right? So unless you permit access, so not even through internet, like it's completely private to you, okay? Just like your on-premise data center, right? So unless you allow some internet access to it, nobody can get into it. But it's exact similar thing. It's on cloud, but it's completely based on your configuration. You decide whom you want to allow, whom you want to deny, okay? And there are multiple layers of security that is there to ensure that this VPC remains completely private, right? And so within VPC, right? So there are bunch of servers that deployed within this. So some of them are mentioned here. EC2 is a compute service, RDS is a database service, but all these services are again inside your VPC, which means they're private. Nobody else can access them unless you provide access. Okay? And so you can provide virtual networks within them, okay? And you can configure your routing, your IP settings. You can also define which traffic can go out, which traffic can used to be internal, and all that stuff, okay? And so just an example, this is so US West to Oregon, this is the region, right? So in that region you picked an availability zone A, okay? And in that and within your account you're creating this test VPC, right? So and it gets a private IP range /16 here, and that you can further split into subnets, okay? And so here, so this is completely private, so only when you log in you get access to it, but nobody else can get into it, okay? Because everything is private, so even if you ping an IP, you won't be able to do it, okay? Next thing what you do is you can create a internet gateway. So ITW internet gateway here. And once you create the internet gateway, right, so that's when you allow internet access, right? So which means unless you create an internet gateway, nobody will be able to access it, okay? So if you want to keep completely private, you can do that. So you create an internet gateway and attach it to certain subnets. Say suppose you want your application has a web service on the front end, right? So you want only that to be in the accessible to the public, right? So you can put that in a public subnet, attach it to internet gateway, only then it will become public. The private subnet is still in private, so nobody else can access it. So the way typically it will work is you might have your web tracing applications in public subnet, your database or anything storage or middleware in the private subnet, and nobody can access it. So that way you're securing it, okay? And similarly, right? So yeah, So somebody wants to access, right? So using internet, they'll get a web tier, and only web tier can access your application tier, and only your application tier can access your database tier. And all you can configure, okay, which IP can access, which port to access, everything through the console, right? Just with few clicks, you can just enable, disable, and decide who can access them. And at the same time, right? So to deploy and maintain all of that, you can have private access to them through your corporate network. Okay, so that's how you use VPC to deploy a private network for yourself. And next we look at EC2. So this is one of the earliest services within AWS cloud. And this is the Elastic Compute Cloud, which will provide you the virtual machines in the cloud, right? So you can create an EC2 instance or server in the cloud, right? To run any application, right? Web server, database server, mail server, anything. And so this again is pay as you go, okay? And if you run your server for 1 hour, you only bill it for 1 hour, 10 minutes only for 10 minutes. So it's a pay as you go model. You can pick how much hardware you want, which software you want to use, which OS you want to use, and right from your browser you can deploy servers across any of the regions available across globally. Okay, and this is how you typically do it. You go to console, you go, there's a EC2 launch wizard, and there you select EMI is it's an image, right? So if you want a WordPress image, or if you want Nginx or web server image, you pick that image. You pick your hardware, right? 8 GB memory, 16 CPU, and all of that, right? And you configure a network. Like, I want to place this in my private network, public network. Then you say, like, I want 100 GB storage, 500 GB storage, and how you want to access it, right? So the private key will also be there, and you launch and connect it. So that's it. Like, usually it takes only a few minutes to get started to launch an instance. And there are again a large variety of instances that are available. Okay, so based on your needs, it could be these are typically like the series, right? So M is a general purpose series which you can use it for anywhere. If you want high CPU performance, you pick up C series, or if you want GPU, G series, things like that. Okay, and you can deploy your Linux or Windows, or you can deploy using ARM processor, Intel x86, any of these architectures. So, I mean, if time permits, I'll probably run you through a quick demo on the console so that you can see something in live as well. Okay, and so a virtual CPU or vCPU, right? Typically, it's like your physical CPU, but in a hyper-threaded mode. Okay, so I won't spend more details on it, but like, just understand, you get a CPU power virtually, which is called vCPU. Okay, and memory again, like, it's just like the RAM that you have in your CPUs on your uh, laptops and desktops, right? So that's CPU. And storage, again, you can get up to 16 TB storage, and again, different types of storages, right? If you want solid state storage or magnetic storage, so multiple options on the storage as well. And yeah, instance types again, right? So you can see which size you want. So typically it will map like that. If you want 2x large is size of 2x, 2 times the x large, 4x is 2 times the 2x. So if x large has 1 vCPU and 2 GB RAM, typically 2x large instance size will have 2 vCPU and 4 GB RAM. So that's how you pick an instance when you deploy it. Okay, and this is a naming convention, right? So you have an instance family, whether you want a CPU intensive, memory intensive, and the generation, the sizing. Okay, this again, I think when we do the demo, you'll get a bit more idea on it. So wide variety of operating systems supported on top of it: Linux, Windows, Red Hat, and all of it. Okay, so AMI. So AMI is a machine image, okay, which has a prepackaged stuff, right? So you can start from a bare operating system and install applications, or you could pick in AMI which has everything pre-configured, right? So for example, if you in your company, right? So if you have a certain configurations, right? So for every server, you can actually make those configurations, install those scripts, applications, and package that as an image. And every time you deploy, you just take that image and deploy. So which will, instead of doing it every time, right? So that will help you um, so launch faster and have that consistent image across, right? So and so not just you preparing an image, right? So on AWS there is a already set of pre-built AMIs, and also there is a marketplace where a lot of people create their own AMIs and sell them or provide it for free as well, right? So on the console you see these AMIs like this: Amazon Linux, Red Hat Linux, or CentOS, Debian. So all these things, and based on your application needs, you can pick up. If you want to install WordPress, like there'll be a WordPress image that you can pick, which is pre-packaged. So this is your compute power, basically for deploying servers in the cloud, right? So that's a basic building block. Okay. Next step is for any cloud application to run at scale, right, and to distribute load effectively, and also to have redundancy. What you also need is a load balancer. So in AWS, this is called ELB, or Elastic Load Balancer. Okay, and this is managed load balancing service, which means you don't have to actively see what's happening to this service, whether it's running fine or going down. It's completely managed. You get the performance that you need from that. Okay, and load is distributed between the instances underneath it. So typically what you'll have is like this, like from internet, you access the load balancer. You don't, the servers are not directly exposed to the internet. All of them go to load balancer, and on the load balancer, you can distribute the traffic, right? You can route them. Okay, I want traffic to go evenly, like in a round robin to each of these applications. Or you could say, I want to, based on the geolocation, right? So if traffic is coming from India, I want them to go to a server in India. So you can do that. Or you could say, okay, based on the load, right? If server one is too much loaded, okay, let next request I want to send it to server two. So and for example, server one goes down, right? So load balancer will know, okay, something is down, it's not healthy, and it won't send traffic to that node. It will send it to somewhere else. Okay, so that's the purpose of load balancer. You can do a lot more. A lot more sophisticated things on that, with rules and routing and all of that. But at a high level, distributes the load, make sure it's multiple servers can serve a particular traffic without the clients knowing it, right? So clients will only know the load balancer, but everything underneath is isolated from them. Okay, and we are almost touching the 1 hour mark. So what I'll do is, after load balancer, we'll take a 10-minute break, but I'll quickly wrap up this load balancer part. Okay, and so I just expand this. So you have target groups are basically a bunch of servers there, right? So load balancer distributes them based on the rules, be it yeah, be it your location, be it based on the load and health, and using various parameters. So the load gets distributed. Okay, so this is about load balancer, and I'll pause here. Sudhir, is that fine? We'll take a 10-minute break now.
Yeah, Kishan, sure, definitely.
Okay.
So do you want to take it now?
Yes, yes. So we are at the 1 hour mark. I thought we can take
Yeah,
now. And in
sure.
this time, if there are any questions, I didn't actively see the chat, but there are questions I can
Yeah,
take.
I'll take care of the chat box actually. Like if anyone is having any queries, they can post the questions there. I'll try to
Okay.
consolidate and read out maybe after the break time or at the end as per
Okay.
your comfort, Kishan.
Sure, sure. Yeah, maybe some of them we can take after the break.
Yeah, yeah.
Otherwise,
Maybe
I don't know. I
we'll
don't
rejoin
want
at
it to be a
11:40
monologue.
then.
Yes, yes, yeah. I don't want it
Yeah,
to be a monologue. I
yeah,
want to
yeah.
hear some feedback. I mean, if this making sense or there's something else they're looking for. So just want some feedback so that it will be more
Yeah.
productive. Yeah.
Sure, Kishan. Thank you. So you'll join back at 11:40 then. Kishan, if you're back, maybe we can start off. It's okay for you.
Yes, yes, Sudhir. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we got only just three questions. Maybe first question is already answered. I'll just try to read out the questions, Kishan. Maybe you can answer one by one. So
Sure.
first question is about why we need AWS when we have other cloud providers.
Yeah, you're right, Sudhir. And yeah, so why AWS, I covered it in detail, but if there are anything follow-up question on that, right? So
Yeah.
happy to address that, but yeah, we will discuss that in
Sec-
detail.
Yeah. Second question. Can we create more than 5 elastic IPs in one region?
Okay, yeah. Looks like somebody who's actively using AWS. So, yeah, so in general, like not just Elastic APIs, any resources within AWS, so they come with kind of a soft limit, right? So when you first start, right, so it's basically it works both ways, right? So if somebody is misusing or if application is misbehaving, and suddenly tries to consume too much of resources. To avoid that, there are soft limits placed on all the services, which includes the Elastic IPs, right? So by default, you cannot create more than 5 Elastic IPs. But the mechanism here is you can always based on your need, right? You can always create requests to get this incremented. So within your AWS account, so you can create a ticket and provide justification why you want limit to be increased on certain resources, and that will get increased. That's one. And even otherwise, right? So what also happens is when somebody creates an account afresh, they'll have lower limits. Like even the number of servers you can create will be lower when they start with, right? But as they continue using, so automatically they'll get their limits also get increased. So some are like the limits which will evolve, or like they get based on the user they get increased, but there are limits for which you need to raise tickets to get increased. So these are the two kinds I would say. Definitely for Elastic IPs also you can create a ticket to get that increase.
Yeah. Thanks, Kishan. Next question is how many buckets we can create in AWS by default?
Yeah. So this again, I think it falls in the same category. Okay. So number of buckets are maybe I'll just try to get the exact number, but so while there is a limit, right? So each bucket can hold up to, yeah, few 5 terabytes, but number of buckets as such, it'll be few. Okay, I mean, like I can look up the exact number, but it's quite high to, you can get up to 100 buckets in each of your accounts, right? If you need additional buckets, you can increase it to even up to 1,000 by submitting a limit increase. Okay,
Okay.
so that's how it is. By default, it's 100, like the Elastic IPs limit, right? So there are these soft limits that are in place, but as you use, you can actually request for relaxation of these limits.
Thank you. Next question is can you explain different types of instances in AWS?
Okay. Yeah. So maybe I'll go to a previous slide here. So when we're talking about instance types, right? One is based on the configuration, and one is based on yeah. So these are the instance types, right? So these are there are a few more types, but there's a broad set of instance types here. So like if you, usually people start with the general purpose because they may not know if their application is CPU intensive or memory intensive, right? So they'll start with general purpose, and once they use it for a certain period and figure out that okay, my application is CPU instance, or if they're not operate, they can start with C series, right? The compute optimized instance types. And similarly, like if they want more RAM, they can go with memory optimized, similarly storage. And there are instances specifically for example, same for machine learning workloads or graphical processing, right? So based on each use case, I would say there are various instance type available. Okay, maybe I'll just paste this link. You can go through it offline. But there is a philosophy behind that. You pick the kind of instance that you want. Okay, so I'm just posting it here. Right. So this has details about all the instance types that are available on AWS. Okay. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6, 7 different types. Okay. So yeah, we'll move on.
We have two more questions. Can we take it now or?
Yeah, we'll complete the questions. Whatever is, yeah, we can complete.
Yeah. VPC peering in real-time example.
Okay. VPC peering. So I'm trying to see if I'm going to cover it, but yeah. So quickly, I'll explain. So we talked about VPC being a virtual private cloud, right? So it is your own private cloud. Nobody has access to it. Okay. But there could be cases, right? Or it could be due to integrations or I mean different applications altogether. For various reasons, you deploy them into different VPCs. Okay. So VPC1, VPC2 to different applications, but there was a business need for them to communicate with each other. Okay. So one way is that you could have both these applications expose their APIs or the services on a public on it towards the internet and let them communicate with each other, right? So that's one way where like one VPC talks to other VPC or the application in one VPC talks to other application another VPC via the internet. But there could be cases where you don't want the traffic to go over internet, right? You want to just keep it private and you don't want anybody else to access. So that's where you create this peering between these two VPCs. Basically, you're kind of creating a channel between these two VPCs to communicate with each other. Okay, and that is like you're saying, okay, these two, I know these two VPCs. Okay, these two are mine, or this other VPC, I'm well aware like there's no security risk. I can expose certain things to other VPC. So that's where you create this VPC peering so that even though they're isolated, based on certain business need or a technical need, you kind of want to have that communication channel established. So that's called VPC peering. Okay, and similarly, the next level of that is there is something called transit gateway. So if you're using two VPCs, like you can just do peering, but think of it having like about if you have 10 or 15 VPCs and you want some connectivity between each of them, right? So there's something called transit gateway. It's more like the hub and spoke model, where you put the transit gateway and you can have all the VPCs connect to it, and they'll all be interconnected that way. So that's about VPC.
Thanks, Kishan. One more question. Can we migrate instance T3 to C5?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is again like a few clicks of on the console, right? So you stop the instance, change your instance type, and start it again. So that's how easy it is. You can change the instance types. So yeah, I'm hoping I'll get some time to at least launch one VM and show that all the instance changing and all of that for you. Let's see how it goes.
Yeah, I think that's it for now, Kishan.
Yeah.
Can proceed forward. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, based on the question, it looks like many of them are quite aware about AWS services. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's
So,
good.
yeah, that's good. So, maybe you can spend a bit more time towards and addressing any specific questions, or we can have a more deeper session at a later time. Okay. So, I'll move ahead now. So, we covered all this. We finished the load balancer, right? Right. So, next is auto scaling, right? So auto scaling is a mechanism where you want to scale up and down, but you don't want to do it manually, right? So you want to define a metric and let the system take care of it, right? For example, uh, your IPL match is starting at 7:30 p.m. and as and when users come in, you want to spin up more instances, right? So the way it works is you create some metrics, be it CPU, memory, or a number of users connecting to the application. So it could be any metric, and based on the metric, like you create a rule saying, okay, if my CPU utilization is more than 75%, create one more server and attach it to the same load balancer or do whatever, right? So that's the auto scaling rule, okay? And so what this will help you is like you don't have to actively manage, right? how much load is coming in and take actions based on that. So the whole scaling aspect can be automated, right? So this will help in actually better capacity utilization, right? So when you are planning capacity, right? So you can do two things. One is like you can probably plan for your average capacity. So for example, in this left side one, right? So if you're planning for average capacity, maybe you're uh, provisioning for somewhere in the middle, okay? Or what will happen is if you do provision lower, when you hit the peak on here on Tuesday, right? There's a peak on Tuesday. When the load comes in Tuesday, you won't be able to handle it, okay? And secondly, if you provision for the peak, which means if you provision for the Tuesday capacity, rest of the days, Sunday and Thursday or other days we are seeing, right? So there's a lot of unused capacity. So to address these two, right? One is like not to have wastage, and at the same time to meet the demand. So auto scaling is a preferred method here, where based on the load coming in, right, your capacity is just going along those lines, right? On Sunday you had only one server, so Monday you had like say three servers, Tuesday four, like that. So based on the load coming in, you increase your capacity, and so on the then when your load goes down, right, you also can reduce the servers and save your capacity that way, resulting in better capacity. Okay. um, so these are critical questions that we are answering through this auto scaling, right? So to manage the fluctuations, okay, to provision on demand. So both scaling to meet the demand and also automating the whole process, right? So the yeah, so this is how it will work, right? So initially start with you have a load balancer and you put two servers behind it. Okay, so then there is scaling event that happened, right? For example, I mean, it could be anything. Some sun load came in, okay, and your load is coming in and you add one more server. So that's when scale out happens, and one more server gets added to the group, and load balancer will automatically know and start directing traffic to it. And similarly in scaling, right? So same thing happens when load reduces. One server is removed and scaling happens, and you're back to two servers. Right? So we covered EC2, we covered load balancer, we covered auto scaling. Next we'll cover EBS. It's the storage option. So or the elastic block storage, right? So here again, it's again elastic and pay as you go, right? So you don't have to straight up like buy only say a 1 TB or 2 TB. So in fact, like storage is I would say most even capacity you can add some RAM and all of that. But storage typically people provision high, thinking okay, I might need lot more storage maybe 2 years later, and they buy upfront, right? But what happens is like you may not need, you will not use entire capacity upfront. So out of 1 TB you might be using only 100 GB, and 900 GB is getting wasted. So this EBS or elastic block storage is again, you can increase the size anytime. You start with 100 or 200 what you need, and you can keep increasing. Okay, and it's persistent. So even if you stop the instance, the storage still remains there. You can attach the storage to another instance. Okay, and there again, there are two types like instance types, right? So there are two types. One is a hard disk or a magnetic regular hard disk, and a solid state hard disk. So obviously SSD is slightly expensive but faster, whereas SSD is slower. Okay, and you can take snapshots of these volumes for backups. You can create images to deploy in another place. You can encrypt the entire volume for security purposes. You can keep increasing them based on the okay. And so we covered some of this. We will proceed here. You can take snapshots, you can create volumes from those snapshots. Okay, you can increase capacity, you can move from SSD to HDD kind of storage, or even more like if you want more IO, right, you can move to an IO optimized storage. All that you can make changes. So that's about volumes. Next, we'll move to S3. So uh, S3 is also along with EC2 one of the early services. This is a block storage service, okay, and which is highly durable, extremely low cost and durable. So this is designed for if you can read it. So it provides 11 nines durability. So which means if you put a file or a photo on S3, right? So it automatically creates copies across instances, and it will ensure that it is durable for 11 nines time, right? And you can virtually store anything or any number of objects. So somebody asked about the number of buckets, right? You You can create 100 buckets by default, but you can increase them that number further. But also within each bucket, right, you can create folders and put lots of objects within them. And so this kind of your virtual storage, right? You create a bucket and you put a file there, so that becomes your key. So basically, the way it works is kind of a key value storage. Okay, key will be your file name typically, and your object is actually the value. You can put your video file, photos, and everything. And so, in fact, a lot of websites are also hosted on S3 because it's cheaper. It has a built-in mechanism to create a hosted website out of it, right? So there's buckets and objects within them, and these objects are redundantly stored within the region. Okay, so the same file is redundantly copied, so you get better durability. Okay, and so you can say, I mean, you don't have to say like when you create a bucket, you don't have to say, look, I want a bucket with 5 TB size, right? You just create a bucket, okay, and you just keep dumping objects into it, and you'll be charged only for the size that uh, you use within those buckets. Okay, you can store applications, you can do website hosting, bucket for your backup. Also, you can put your images, the volume backups in there. You can put your all the big data for staging area, right? You can put that there, and then you can do analytics on top of it. So it's a lot of use cases there, right? But key thing is like uh, it's scalable, durable, and at the same time very very low cost, right? If I look at the cost, right? So GB of S3, let me just quickly check. It will be a fraction of a dollar uh, per month. So just give me 1 minute. Okay, so first 50 TB will cost you, yeah, it costs $0.023 per GB, 0.023. So it's very, very inexpensive compared to other types of storage. Okay. And next is an RDS, also called the Relational Database Service. Okay. And so like the operating systems, right? So uh, database, if you want to deploy database, first you need to create a server, uh, deploy an operating system, then you deploy your database, then you define your schema, put the data. So there are a lot of things, and there's ongoing patches and maintenance that needs to happen. You need to take care of security. So there is typically these are things that you do on any database, right? So but with AWS RDS, right? So what you get is like uh, again going back to that undifferentiated heavy lifting, right? So all these are anybody has to do. It's a common skill. It doesn't need any specialized thing. So you can offload all of that and use a managed service where you say like, okay, create me database, and database is there, maintenance and patching, everything is taken care. You create your tables with that and dump your data, right? So that's how RDS works, right? And your applications can use them seamlessly. Okay, it supports you as a customer, right? You only have to worry about your application, your database schema, and data. Everything else is managed by AWS. OS, backup, installation, availability, scaling, power, everything is managed by AWS. So that way, like you're focusing again on your application, on your business needs and your customer needs. Okay? So RDS supports multiple existing databases, MySQL, SQL Server, Postgres, and all of that. So which means that you don't have to make changes to your application, right? So this exact same database that you're already using, just that like you'll port it to RDS, and your application will be able to use it the way it's working earlier, right? And here again, you get to define what database you want to use, okay, what size, right? So how much CPU, memory, network performance, again on the storage side also, whether you need a provision IOPS and all of that, okay. And within our RDS, there is also one more flavor called Amazon Aurora, which again supports both MySQL and Postgres. And this is a even more improved version of RDS. In a way, it's like it performs, if I'm not wrong, about 50% better and costs about only 50% of the other RDS. Okay, so that's Aurora, and these RDS, right? So typically, you put them again in your private subnet, okay, so that they're secured from the internet. and use it for your application. Okay, so it sits within your VPC again within your own private network, right? And RDS also has this concept of a standby instance, right? Where for high availability, you typically want to put that in another availability zone. We talked about regions and availability zones, if you remember. So you deploy a standby instance in another availability zone and set up the replication using. So RDS has inbuilt replication as well, or you could use some native particular database vendors synchronization technique also. But basically, the point is you're ensuring you have another instance which can serve your traffic in the instance the master database goes down, right? So that's how you ensure high availability with multi AC, right? So yeah, that's like the three-phase power that we talked about. So this is how in the event of a failover, right? So master database goes down and application can quickly switch to the standby instance. All right, so we covered EC2, load balancer, EBS, auto scaling, the object store S3, and the databases. So these are some of the key services widely used, but this is only a fraction of the services. There are AML services, there are analytics services, so many IoT services, right? So we won't have enough time to cover all of them, but just wanted to get a glimpse of some of these, right? Next, I want to go into the certifications part, right? So companies are looking for more and more of a cloud expertise, right? So this is a stat where there's been 600% increase in jobs featuring AWS since 2012. Okay, and this probably even more because this stat is slightly older, could be even more now. Okay, and so a lot of companies are saying they want to train as many people as possible on cloud, right? And uh, to have that capacity in-house in their companies. And right, so while we know that okay, there is need for cloud and AWS skills, right? So why would you want to do a certification, right? Uh, so one is you maybe you're already doing something, you want to upskill and add cloud to your existing set of skills, okay? Or there could be new opportunities, right? It could be outside another company or within your own companies. There is new cloud business that are starting or new cloud projects that are starting, right? By doing these certifications, you'll be able to have that skill to get into that new roles. Okay. Or third reason could be innovation, which by which I mean like you want to you have a business idea, you want to start everything on your own, right? So basically, what that means is instead of earlier where you need a large upfront investment to start a company, right? So with cloud pay as you go, right, you can start really small, and they can just start with a free tier where you get most of the services free as well, right? You start small when you try out and see a particular idea clicks, right? That's when you can scale up, and if it fails out, you can like bring down the entire infrastructure in minutes, and you're not losing too much. So in fact, like a lot of the startups, right, that gone big now, be it Byju's or an academy, right? So they all started slow on AWS. They innovated, and in fact, Byju's also leverages AML services to create personalized learning for about 15 million plus students, right? So these are the companies like they started small on AWS. They tried few things. I'm sure they. I don't think they would have stumbled upon the right idea at the very first, but they would have definitely tried multiple options. They failed many times, but eventually they would have got to the right direction, found the right solution, went big, right? So, even if you want to do any of those, right? So you can start small and start learning about AWS. Okay, so this is another start about demand for certifications, specific to cloud certifications, right? Again, like if you can see, right? So across in applications, the number of applications using AWS and who those were experimenting and planning to use. Again, slightly older stat, 2018, but these numbers I'm sure would have gone up further last 2 years. Okay, so um, first, the benefits that you gain expertise, it could also result in your effective compensation and career advancement. Right. These are the various certification paths within AWS, right? So at the foundational level, you have a cloud practitioner. Okay, this is the very fundamental course where you, like anybody who doesn't even know about cloud, right? So they can start learning about cloud and take this exam. So this is you need not be technical also. Okay, so this is more for anybody, even for business audience also, those who want to know what cloud is and what it can AWS cloud can do for them. So that's a course. Okay, AWS cloud practitioner. And next, the path splits into three legs. So there is solution architect path where somebody is involved in more of a solutioning application, okay, or identifying the right components and putting them together. So that's a solution architect path. And there are two more parts. One is the operations, right? So also the sysops. So sysops is where you're managing all the monitoring and automating things and all of that, right? So that's the sysop path. And finally, there is a DevOps path, the developer path, where you are actively the developer who wants to develop on AWS, right? So using serverless or various other things available, right? So that's the developer path. So start with cloud practitioner, then once you get an idea, okay, what is there in within AWS, right? Then you can, based on your choice, you can typically go into either of the paths, right? So architect, operations, or developer. So whereas on architect's side, right, there is also a professional path where you can finally do a professional certification on architect. On the operations and developer side, right? So you can actually do a DevOps which caters to both developer and sysops. Okay, so these are the two paths. And typically, what I see most people is they start with cloud practitioner, but if they already know, they kind of skip the cloud practitioner and they do the solution architect associate, and they also complete the other associates and then do either of the professionals, right? So that's the kind of path typically people choose. And then on the right side you have the specialty exams, right? So these are where like you want to specialize in in a particular thing, right? On the left side is more like a generalized, right? On the right side, you are a big data specialist or a security specialist or a machine learning specialist. You kind of pick one of those specializations and get certified on that. But nevertheless, like even if you go for the specialty, right? So I would strongly recommend, right, to at least cover all the associate exams, like to get a good foundation, cover a good amount of breadth. So I'm kind of more of a generalist. Right? What I did was I did the cloud practitioner and did the associate exams and did the professional. I'm not so much into DevOps, but I did the solution architect professional. I've not done the specialties as well, but maybe like sometime I'm not sure. But based on what you want to do, right? So you can pick these paths, any of these. But my guidance would be like uh, start with cloud practitioner. But if you know already fundamentals, right, you can directly go to solution architect associate, complete all associates. Then think about like which path you want to go. You want to go to a specialty path or a professional path. Okay. And so there are a lot of resources available, right, for certification. So there is AWS documentation, FAQs, white papers, all publicly available for free. Okay, there is a lot of reInvent. reInvent is the annual AWS event where like a lot of videos from there are put on YouTube, right? So there is AWS training again. There is a lot of free digital training available on AWS. You don't have to pay for it. And exam readiness courses, right? So there again, like for each certification exam, there is a readiness exam course available again for no cost, right? And then there are third party things like there is Cloud Guru, Linux Academy, Wiz Labs. Actually, Linux Academy was acquired by Cloud Guru, but so these are the third party. I mean, other people like who actually create a structured course for you to do a certification, right? So Cloud Guru, Linux Academy, and Udemy, there are courses, whereas Wiz Labs also provides you with the labs where you can do it, try things out hands on. Okay. So some tips on the preparation, right? You start with the exam guide to know what is required of that exam, okay, and identify the content, right? So, but all the exams have this pattern. You have multiple choice and multiple response kind of a thing, right? But exam guide, exam readiness courses, when you do it, like they'll provide you more specific guidance, right? How to go about that particular exam, okay, and okay, and they also have. It's not a fixed number, but grading is also not straightforward, but usually the score, passing score is about 750, and scores are in the range of 100 to 1000. Okay, and next is for each course they'll also tell you, okay, what is this certification will cover these topics, right, along with the percentage. You can also plan your preparation along those lines, right? And yeah, similar example, right? And so course content, right? I briefly talked about that, right? You can, I mean, some courses are good at a particular certification. You can pick them, right? Based on what you like and a pattern of the presentation. Okay, and it's a lot of videos we talked about, blogs, white papers, documentation, right? So a lot of stuff that is available. Okay, and so you can take practice exams on these labs. You can also try hands-on stuff there. Okay, and so one more thing I would say is uh, how much ever you read it, nothing beats practice or experience. So you can sign up for a free tier, try out few things, or these labs kind of providers, like they have inbuilt labs where they tell you, like, I mean, they create environment for you to try out few things. Okay, so that's about the certification. Okay, and yeah, so we have some more time now. Please feel free to, or I think we have some questions already.
We have one more question, Kishan. Like, shall we go into the Q&A round now, or like?
Yeah, we'll do a Q&A, and I'll maybe just do a quick demo after that.
Okay, sure. So one question what we got is like, scaling is done by our application software like Python or AWS AutoScript settings.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so you don't have to do scaling within your application. So yeah, maybe it's the right time to show it as well now.